Hello and welcome to a very special edition of The Week That Really Was, or in this instance, perhaps the weekend that really was. We had multiple requests yesterday as the results were rolling in on the 39th and 40th Amendments to the Constitution to do a special episode giving our reaction and some analysis. So here we are. And Sarah, how are you? How did you enjoy the day?
It was great. I'm very happy. I tweeted, I mean, I think if you're, obviously you have to exercise caution and everything like that, but I think if you've been in politics a long time, I kind of knew it was over by 9:30.
Yeah.
I saw a couple of boxes. Kevin Humphreys from Labour tweeted a photo of a box, and I saw the tallies and I said, that's it. Like, I'm confident. I didn't obviously have any idea what the margin was going to be, but the margin in those boxes that he tweeted a photo of was so heavily in favour of no. I thought you can forget it.
Yeah.
I knew it was it. I'm in a few groups like, on WhatsApp and stuff, lawyers for no and different things like that. And they were like, some of them would have never been really involved in a referendum before. And they're like, oh, how long before a result? And I was kind of like, guys, I'm happy to call it now if you'd like. It's over.
Well, I knew I didn't know, but I was fairly certain at 9:05 a.m.
Yeah.
And the reason I was fairly certain was Colette Colfer. Colette is a lecturer down in I think is Waterford IT now called the Southeastern Technological University. Anyway, she's been quite active on sort of gender issues and what have you. And I think she was very passionate about these referendums. And I think it was her first ever count. And at 9:05 a.m., she sent a tweet. She was her first ever time tallying. And I don't even think she was really tallying. She was just observing. She said at 9:05 a.m., white papers, no, 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 haven't seen a yes yet. Yeah. And I was like, okay. I mean, and I was cautious about it because, all respect to Colette, I think it was her first time ever to count. She wasn't doing a formal tally. She was just giving her impression. Could have been one box or whatever. But I thought that sounds ominous.
Yeah, but the thing is that you would rarely really get anymore a situation in referendums where you would have like a kind of a box in one constituency or two that's kind of 90% no, 10% yes, but that overall everywhere else in the country isn't. Do you know what I mean? It'd be kind of rare.
Yeah, exactly. And I have to give a shout out to a particular TD. I can't name them, only to say that they're on the government benches. But I was texting back and forth with a bunch of people, and this particular person at 22 minutes past 9 said this could be in the high 60s for no. And I just have to say, like, because I wasn't sure what the margin would be. I had a fair idea where it was headed. I just have to say that guy can count. A lot of these politicians, they can't necessarily count the budget, but they can count votes, and that guy can count. So yeah, but it was an unprecedented walloping. You and I were saying on Friday in our episode, which went out the day of the referendum, we gave our final predictions. We both came down saying it would be a no. I certainly didn't see anything on this scale coming. I thought maybe on a good day we might kind of get a Lisbon 1 kind of margin in both of them, sort of in the sort of 54 to 58% no vote, for example. I didn't see anything like this coming. You were saying off air you had an inkling, but you were afraid to voice it.
Yeah, I was afraid to just look like an absolute gobshite if I said I thought it was going to be really strong no. But the thing is that the profile of the people in the last few days, like I have, I think I've said this on the podcast before, that I'm, conservative than my parents, for example. And when I was speaking to different people, like my mum and whatever, and she was voting no, I thought that's unusual. And there was other people in my life that I kind of use as, benchmarks for things. And, friends from like who were very old friends from working class families in the inner city, no. But then friends in legal circles, they were no. So there was just too broad a spectrum of no. But then you think, am I in a bubble? I don't know. You start to doubt it. And then, as I said on the podcast, the best predictions you ever make are on the things you don't care about at all. Yeah. Because you're just completely removed from the situation. You can just analyse it completely clinically. So I was kind of getting nervous that I was A, in a bubble, or B, just hearing what I wanted to hear. And because I'm quite vocal politically, sometimes people kind of don't tell you what they're voting, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
So I was kind of worried about all of that. But then I had a couple of conversations on Friday night, and I thought, yeah, this is toast. There's no way. There's no way that many people that like I kept seeing people saying, "Oh, I haven't met one yes voter." Now I did, but just in no numbers at all.
Yes,
So
it's funny. I had these, and indeed, I had this conversation with you about 3 or 4 episodes back in the middle of the campaign, where I said I hadn't met a yes voter yet, and I was actually getting suspicious of the fact that I hadn't, and I was like, and I was starting to doubt myself, thinking because I run a media outlet, and if this ends up being 50-50 or God forbid 60-40 yes, I'm going to have to really start questioning, am I in a bubble?
Yeah.
Am I the one in the bubble? Because I'm not meeting people voting the other way. I'm not encountering this kind of disagreement. And then I had a little bit of a wobble on Friday evening in terms of my prediction of the result when I went to my own polling station, which is in a very rural part of Tipperary. Literally Killinascully country. I mean, it was filmed where I vote, right in the pub right next door where I vote. And the turnout was very low, and the presiding officer said to me, it's been hugely older people voting today so far. There may have been a rush afterwards. I think there was. But I kind of got nervous because I thought to myself, is this sort of like true blue Fianna Fáilers and Fine Gaelers coming out to vote the way the party tells them? Is that why the polls are saying what they're saying in terms of the Red C poll showing 60% yes? But then, again, on Friday night, I was talking to my family, etc., and they were all giving me the same impression that everyone they were talking to was voting no. And so it proved we were not the ones in a bubble. And I think it's important to talk about the people who are in a bubble, because I was looking this morning, the National Women's Council of Ireland, the day before the vote, put out this graphic. And it's one of the favourite things that NGOs do. They put out a graphic showing all the NGOs that are on their side, from...
It's handy for a hit list. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, how can the National Women's Council of Ireland justify its existence on the basis that it represents Irish women when it's just been on the end of a drubbing like this? It's a rhetorical question. You don't have to answer it, but if you want to answer it, go ahead.
No, what I was going to say is, and like sometimes I can be prone to dramatics, I suppose, but I really don't think I'm being dramatic when I say I think that the National Women's Council of Ireland is a thundering disgrace and should be disbanded. A women's organisation that clearly doesn't represent women, sought to have women removed from the Constitution, believes in men in women's sports, men in women's prisons, men in women's spaces. It should be disbanded immediately. It takes a massive amount of our taxpayers' money to do what exactly? Nothing. Doesn't represent me, doesn't represent any woman, and is just a cosy little cartel of wokesters cheering each other on in a bubble and doing whatever the government want them to do. They should be absolutely dismantled immediately. And this referendum has shown they're a useless little sock puppet for the government.
It's not just them. I mean, I'm looking at this banner that they...
Of course, it's not just them, John, but they're supposed to be the National Women's Council of Ireland and the referendum about women.
As far as I'm concerned, preach, sister.
Yeah. So next year, if there's a referendum on removing farmers from the national discourse, well, the National Farmers Association should probably not be in favour of it. And if they were, I'm sure the farmers would want that organisation to be dismantled after the referendum or whatever was annihilated. And that's what's happened here. They don't represent women. So what is the point of them?
Funny thing is, and this is just an aside, I'm always trying to because my staff at Gript are wonderful people, but I'm the only really rural person in there, so they don't understand there are like 3 different farmers associations: the Irish Farmers Association, the Irish Creamery Milk Suppliers Association, the Irish Cattle and Sheep Farmers Association. But because they don't get state funding, there is actually sort of a diversity of views and representative bodies in there. Whereas you women, who are a much bigger lobby group than the farmers, you've only got one, and it decides what you all think. So if I want to know what Sarah thinks on a matter of political importance and how her interests should be represented, I ask Orla O'Connor. But the point I wanted to make is, and there's a bigger point here, because I'm looking at that graphic that they put out, and it's on my Twitter feed if anyone wants to see it. Community Work Ireland are there calling for a yes vote. Now, do you honestly think that a group called Community Work Ireland would be campaigning for a yes vote if they weren't receiving government funding?
No.
What else do we have? We have something.
What Roderick said at the start, which is that any NGO that campaigned against this am I not correct? Am I misremembering?
Oh yeah,
Did he say that question? They'd have to
we won't quote.
explain themselves if they go.
Yeah, we won't quote him directly because I don't want to get the quote wrong. But he made a statement along the lines of they'd have to do serious explaining for themselves if they didn't vote, if they didn't campaign hard for a yes vote, which is extraordinary. So we've got the Men's Development Network. Now, I don't know what they do. Apparently, they develop men. What are they doing campaigning on an issue of removing women from the Constitution? We've got the Family Resource Centre National Forum. We've got a crowd called the, let's have a look here, From Lads to Dads. We've got Doris Bui. We've got Spark. We've got the Irish Second Level Students' Union. They can't even vote. The Irish Secondary School Students' Union campaigning for a yes vote. I mean, and they are state funded. And there they are adding their calls to a yes vote in a referendum where the majority of the people they represent can't even vote, and which doesn't impact on their interests any way, shape, or form. The Irish political system is utterly corrupted by these organisations, which are receiving taxpayer.
What else is there? Keep going.
We've got
Society for the Playing of Vagina Monologues Through Interpretive Dance or something, is there?
We've got something called Kinship Care Ireland. We've got Action for Choice, which campaigns on abortion. We've got the Irish Women Lawyers Association. I should say I don't actually know if the Irish Women Lawyers Association receives state funding. I know that they are supported by the Chief State Solicitor's Office, but whether that's a grant or whether it's membership, I don't know. But they're in there as well. We've got Spun Out, of course, which is there to help young people deal with their depression. We've got every single LGBT lobby group, from LGBT Ireland to Outhouse LGBTQ Centre to the Transgender Equality Network of Ireland. I could do another 5 minutes on this. They're all there on the list, and almost all of the organisations that I'm responsible. I did a quick tot this morning, and they get between them something like 7 million quid a year.
Yeah, and they all got money. They all spent money on a campaign that the public absolutely unequivocally rejected. They spent loads of money on it, and the Rotunda Hospital had to fundraise for a new heart machine for babies. Well done, guys.
It's not just that. It's that it's the same problem as the National Women's Council of Ireland, in that they all exist on the pretense that they represent huge blocks of Irish society.
Yeah.
And they don't. But I'm sorry, I don't think LGBT Ireland speak for all LGBT people. I don't believe that LGBT people are fundamentally different to everybody else, and that they all voted yes yesterday in the way, I think it's the same situation as with the National Women's Council of Ireland. I don't think the USI, the Union of Students in Ireland, represents all students. I mean, you only have to look at the turnout in student union elections. It's barely over 10%. I don't think Community Work Ireland represents all community workers. Yes, they have this legitimacy given to them by the state so that their names can be put on a banner to say, oh, well, these are the people who represent you and they're recommending you vote in a particular way. It's a thundering disgrace.
It's depressing as well, because these, there won't be, I mean, look, I hope I'm wrong, but the National Women's Council of Ireland will, move on quickly to something else. There's probably a man in a changing room somewhere, a women's changing room somewhere, who needs their help, and they'll move on quickly to that. And there'll be no consequence, there'll be no accountability. They won't reflect on this. They won't think, oh, maybe we've lost our way a bit with women. Maybe we should, endeavour or change to represent women in a more broad sense. No, they'll just sit around in their little groups and tell themselves how wonderful, and they're morally superior to the rest of us, and the rest of us who disagree with them are far right. And we were all just too stupid to understand the referendum, and they're all sad about it. And then we move on to some other horseshit campaign that they'll run.
No, but do you not think that, and maybe I'm being too much of an optimist, do you not think that somewhere in the bowels of government today, there are one or two people looking at this and kind of going, we've got to stop listening to these people?
I think that there are people in the bowels of government today who are looking at boxes in Ballyfermot that voted 90-something% no, and thinking, I'm very worried about my seat. Yeah. That's what I think. I don't think that like, Senator Erin McGreehan tweeted out a tweet about how sad she was. She said, "It's actually sad that our constitution will continue to refer to me and other mothers as neglecting their duties in the home when we go to work. My family isn't a family either. To say I'm disappointed is an understatement." Now, the fact that a senator in our government tweeted that out yesterday, and was, by the way, was corrected by Community Notes as spreading misinformation even more once again. Has she not read the Constitution? So do you hear anything there about some kind of self-reflection about maybe this campaign was the wrong way to go? No, it's just victimhood, me, and you guys are really disappointing. You all you far right meanies didn't agree and do as you're told, and it's just a sad day for me. No, well, so that doesn't sound like a government senator who's reflecting on this. It sounds like a government senator who's reflecting to themselves about how stupid the rest of us are for not voting the way she wanted us to.
Well, let's actually, there's a, that brings me nicely on to the next part of what I wanted to talk about, because can you work out what, the way the TV license is like 165 quid or whatever it is. If you break that out over the whole year, how much do I have to pay RTE for watching 10 minutes? I don't know, whatever it is, it's
165 quid.
I'm not paying them. I only watched it for 10 minutes yesterday, so I'm not going to pay them the whole TV license. I'll send them a check for 15 cents or whatever. Make it out.
I'll do it.
Yeah, address it to what's his name who runs it, send it through, and or maybe €1 just to make sure I'm totally covered. But I watched 10 minutes of RTE yesterday, and they had Alison O'Connor, my old sparring partner, on, and she was dressed in this wonderful shade of pink, which I think was there to celebrate, a glorious day for womanhood as you were removed from the Constitution. And she was in mourning. She was in high mourning. And the general tone of RTE's coverage, at least the 10 to 15 minutes that I watched, was the poor idiot voters just didn't have a clue what they were being asked to do. And if only the government had explained it a little bit better and people weren't as confused, they might have voted a different way. And it was just confusion. That's why the people got it wrong. The poor little pea brains, they just didn't understand what they were being asked to vote on. And it was terrible. And then Regina Doherty said, we just didn't explain it well enough. And Miriam O'Callaghan was on to say that her taxi driver didn't even know what it was about. And it was just, Sarah, you just didn't know what you were voting on. That was the general tenor, at least in the initial part of the day yesterday. Now, I think Leo Varadkar, to his credit, came out later on and said, look, we have to take this on the chin. It was I think his phrase was, it was a decisive rejection on a good turnout. But the instinctive reaction was very telling, which was the poor fools just didn't understand it.
Listen, you should take advice from good old Nine Genders Doherty there, because she knows where it's at when it comes to the public and what we think. But I think I don't think that people were confused. Look, every referendum, every vote is made up of multiple different constituencies of voters in terms of why or how they voted, right?
Yes, of course.
Of course. But I think, so obviously within those 1.4 million votes or whatever it was, there are people who didn't really understand what they were voting for and voted no as a result. Fine. But I would hazard a guess that that's actually in the minority. And I think that the majority of people had multiple, and I mean multiple reasons to vote no. Like, I was quite personally fixated on the family referendum because of its legal consequences, and I paid less attention to the care one, and so I was less informed on that. And then over the last week, I started coming across people who were really animated about in their opposition to that referendum, and they were angry about how it didn't do this for carers. And carers, it's not an area, I'm not a carer, so it's not an area that I knew that much about. But I think people very much knew what they were doing. And I think that what proves that is that there's a difference between the two no votes. One is significantly bigger. That means that there was thought to it, because if there wasn't thought to it, it would just be across the board roughly the same numbers, no. Do you know what I'm saying? But They thought about it. That's why there was a higher no vote for the care referendum, because voters did understand it. Like, why can't you just say we put something to the public and they rejected it? Why do we have to be not understanding it?
Yeah, I have to say that, and I want to emphasize here, I have great respect for Tom Clonan as a legislator, and I have great respect for him as a parent and as a campaigner. But actually, his reason for voting no on the care referendum would have, if he had been arguing for a yes vote for the reasons that he was voting no, if he'd been saying this puts a legal responsibility on the government to do X, Y, and Z, I would have voted. I would have voted against him. I voted the same way for a different reason. I voted because I didn't believe in deleting mothers from the Constitution.
Yeah.
That's the reason I voted no. But I don't believe, and there was this section on the left going, oh, you need to have more compulsion on the government to do X, Y, and Z for carers. I'm sorry, I just don't think that's the point of a constitution. If you want the government to do more for carers, vote for political parties that are promising to do more for carers and use the democratic process. Don't try and use the courts to compel policy. I think that's so that's just a small point, but I think it is reflective of the diversity of thought inside the no campaigning. You had people voting no for very different reasons on both sides.
Yeah, but also if the government wants to do something about carers, they can do that on Monday.
Of course.
Like this nonsense that carers, that's like that's a kind of an almost cynical ploy to deflect from the government. Do you know what I mean? But like I'm quite like you in the sense that I was voting against that one on the basis of deleting women from the Constitution. But I noticed the care element of it coming up. There was a campaign there. People did understand it.
Yes.
People like I was really quite taken aback and pleasantly surprised by a number of people on Instagram and stuff that I know, people who aren't political at all, putting up on their Instagram stories in the days up to the vote, things like what even is a durable relationship, blah, 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 blah. Like people thought about this. But there is an element, John, and it's important because it's also true that there is an element of this vote, not that didn't understand what the referendums were about, but that decided to absolutely send a message to the government of we are really, really, really displeased with you, what you're doing, and how you're doing it. And that was definitely playing a part there. And that's what I think there are government TDs tonight going, oh my God. Because if you've got 96% no in boxes in Dublin, you better ask yourself, where's your vote coming from the next time? And I'm not suggesting that people who vote no all automatically vote against the government in a general election, but there's a mood out there. And there's a mood out there that the government, that Micheál and Leo and all have done a really good job for the last few months of pretending isn't there. Mm-hmm. On immigration, on loads of different things. They pretend everything's fine. They live in a little circle. They're the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach only of the people they like. And they're surrounded by people like the National Women's Council and people who tell them they're wonderful and special and better than everybody else. And the reality of it is when those boxes spilt out, they started to get a sense of what's out there. And I'd say they're pretty scared today.
Yeah, they are. And I think it will come. I think the next election, if there are credible candidates, organised and coherent, representing an alternative view, I think there will be some shocking results.
Well, I think that's another interesting question because, like I know and like Peadar Tóibín very much long before this referendum, but a couple of things politically happened in this referendum. First of all, and we discussed it on the podcast already, but it's important to say it again. I actually campaigned to retain the Seanad in that referendum. And then afterwards, for a long period of time, regretted it and thought that we'd been sold a pup. However, I will never say a bad word about the Senate again. Because between Sharon Keoghan and Michael McDowell and Ronan Mullen and others, they showed exactly what the Seanad is supposed to do. The Seanad was the only thing that called this government to account in any way, shape or form in the last 2 years. They're the ones who ran this campaign and they deserve massive credit. Yep. And I think that Peadar Tóibín has a party. I saw quite a lot of stuff, and Gript actually ran a press conference for Independent Ireland. They were a no vote, and they ran a lot of stuff on Instagram, stuff that I saw. But the fact of the matter is that these parties need to get themselves organised quickly and start to field candidates that people can vote for, because there's a mood out there to vote for something different. This is the time. This is the moment.
I saw a lot of tweets yesterday suggesting that Senator McDowell should consider a run for the Oris, where the election is scheduled at the end of next year. I mean, it's an interesting one. I think people should never underestimate the challenge of getting elected president and how difficult that campaign is. But I do think, and I mean, I haven't asked him about this. Probably we should ask him. I do think that that there's a huge hunger for something different out there. There's a huge, I mean, because it shouldn't be underestimated the extent to which this was a complete rejection of the body politic. Yeah. Social Democrats, Labour. I mean, I saw Ivana Bacik on television yesterday morning, mouth opening and closing like a fish.
Blaming the government. I tweeted about it. All I can say to that is, lol, you spent $2,000 on your campaign for the thing, and now you blame the government. You are absolutely full of shit.
But if she'd campaigned more, the no vote would have been higher. That's what I think. I mean, I think with her and the Social Democrats, I mean, like they're just an extension of the NGO industrial complex. That's all they are. Those two parties.
Yeah.
And just like I listened and I tried to hear anything redeeming in what she said, anything that would appeal not just to me but to sort of Middle Ireland. And there's nothing there. It's like listening to a gender studies professor. It's just so completely out of touch with where the country is, and they're all competing for this is the funny thing, they're all competing for that 30% of the vote that did what they were told and went out and voted yes yesterday, which is actually, when you consider the turnout, probably something more like 15% of the electorate. And that's where they're at, competing for 15% of the electorate. Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, all these parties.
But Ivana, it's the shamelessness of it for me. And then Aon O'Riordan tweeting about how, if you give conservative parties these kind of issues, they mess it up. Are you joking? Like, the Women's Council and the Social Democrats and Labour and a load of those NGOs, they're just like the human centipede of political organisations. They're all just stuck to each other. Well, I'm not going to get into what the human centipede is. People can Google it if they want, but it's pretty disgusting. But they're the human centipede of Irish politics. They just all feed off each other and talk absolute rubbish, blaming the government after. Like, if you weren't happy with that wording, if you weren't happy with it, same with Mary Lou, why didn't you campaign for a no?
Yeah.
And I said this yesterday on Twitter. I'm no Sinn Féin voter at all. However, I'm angry that we don't have any opposition. Mm-hmm. That they're the main opposition party and they just disappeared, pardon the pun, for the entire campaign. Like they're not opposition. They're done. Why would anybody vote for Sinn Féin? Like
I saw a guy called Andrew Flood yesterday, and I didn't see him in person, but I saw him saying this. Andrew Flood is a radical. He's an anarchist, and he's on the radical left. He'd be much more closely aligned with Paul Murphy and those guys than anybody else, but not an unintelligent commentator. I'll put it that way. But he was bemoaning the left wing parties for campaigning for yes vote, and his stated reason, he understood that his understanding was that many of them had gone that way because they didn't want to be on the same side, quote, as the Iona Institute and the far right.
Yeah,
and I think he's on the money. I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think these people they still see it as sort of toxic to their brand to be on the wrong side as the deplorables, for want of a better term.
That's
to be on the same side as the deplorables. Sorry,
but that's a level of political childishness that has no place in national politics. Still,
yeah,
I mean, if Maria Steen says that is campaigning next year against a referendum to, abolish private home ownership, are you going to vote for it because she's voting against it? Like, do you know what I mean? It's just so, well, he probably would, but like, it's just so childish. Like, I saw loads of tweets. Oh, I just check what the Iona are doing and then I vote against it. Oh, you're so clever.
Yeah, and then it was no voters who were uninformed. I mean,
exactly.
I'm normally mild-mannered, but I said a tweet on X yesterday that a lot of these people who purport to represent establishment Ireland really deserve little less than base contempt. Like contempt, because it's so condescending, and it's so we know best, and how dare you vote against us. That, I mean, obviously, I'm the editor of a media outlet, and aside from issuing an editorial and maybe dropping hints on this podcast from time to time, I didn't call for a vote one way or the other. But I'm happy to, for the sake of transparency, I voted no, obviously.
Yeah.
But
for people will be shocked.
It actually makes me so angry for the state of our democracy, looking around at how overrepresented these people are compared to their support in the country. Mm-hmm. And the public have to do something about it. You and me can complain about it until the cows come home. But if you voted no yesterday because you're angry at this stuff, I would suggest to you that you will be doing yourself a disservice if you turned around and voted for a government party at the next election because the local lad isn't so bad. He might not be, but his existence legitimizes all this stuff.
Well, I think as well that something is changing. Like, I'll tell you a conversation I had literally last night about you. And I had a friend over, and he would be, would have been very liberal a few years ago, and it's kind of changing. Mm-hmm. And he said to me, he voted no now. And he was absolutely delighted last night at the result. And he said to me, I've listened to your podcast a couple of times. And he said, I have to say that I was completely drawn in by this idea that John McGurk was a kind of Catholic, far-right kind of, whatever they say. And he said, and I realized that like I fell for a kind of a spin that's being put around about things like Gript and whatever, that it's a bunch of, Catholic loonies who want this and want that. And he said, and I'm embarrassed that I fell for it, but I'm not falling for it anymore. And I think that is an indication that something's changing. Like being on the far right or whatever is not a slur anymore. It doesn't work. But also, I think people are waking up to the fact that, the Iona Institute, like David Quinn put it really well yesterday. He wrote out a tweet saying, we might be out of touch with the general mood of the public on some issues, but we have our base and we speak for our base. Can the National Women's Council of Ireland say that? And they can't. And I think that people are waking up to the fact that, there's loads and loads and loads of issues that politics addresses, obviously, as part of our day-to-day lives. Way more than just abortion and, a couple of other things. And it's rammed down people's throats all the time, this agenda of liberalism and progress and, be kind and all this garbage. And people are waking up to the fact that it's not producing a good Ireland. It's not producing a nice Ireland to live in. It's not working on immigration. It's not working on education. It's not working on health. And so what we're left with is a bunch of over-bloated, overpaid NGOs and nothing to show for it. And I think people are copping on.
Yep. And in that sense, I think from a democratic point of view, the result was deeply encouraging.
Because you said, by the way, sorry to interrupt you, but you said the other day that you were worried that there was people on the no side who were kind of making it into a bigger thing than it was if it was passed. And I think you're right. However, I think that this is one of those referendums where there's deep symbolism here.
Yes, I would agree. And I was going to say the same thing, in that I actually think, do you know that phrase they have in TV shows where something's a MacGuffin, where like the protagonist and the antagonist are like in a James Bond movie, they don't want like, the world destroyer to fall into the hands of Spectre or whatever. And really, the object they're fighting over is of no particular importance. The point is the fight.
Yeah.
I think that's the case with these referendums. I do think that the issue itself is not as important as the symbolism, as you just said, of the result. And the fact that people, for the first time in a long time, just openly said in enormous numbers, we're not buying it. Yeah. In the face of the entirety of the political establishment, minus the honourable exceptions of Aontú and Independent Ireland, in the face of a huge wall of state-funded campaigning organisations, in the face of, and I mean, I don't want to over-egg this because the media were not as on side as they were in the case of marriage and abortion, for example, but I was talking to one columnist for the Irish Independent yesterday who was steaming at RTE for their editorial choices during the referendum and felt that they had tried to tilt the balance overtly towards the yes side. Definitely the preponderance of the media was in favour of the yes vote. I don't think it was as bad as in previous referendums, but it was there. And in the face of all of that, almost 7 in 10 of us in one referendum and more than 7 in 10 of us in another said, we're not buying it. I think that's monumentally significant.
Yeah, and I think I think that a yes vote would have had consequences, and as we found out the other night, the Attorney General agrees with me on durable relationships would have caused, serious increases in litigation. There would have been consequences. But for me, and I think a lot of people feel this way, I felt that an overwhelming yes vote would have made me feel personally quite deflated in the sense of, are people just going to vote whatever the NGOs tell them going forward? There was something kind of depressing about that.
I think that. I think the scene last night in Dublin Castle when the result was being announced in the care referendum, I tweeted a picture of it, and it was literally like 6 people there, 2 of whom at least were Ronan Mullen and Michael McDowell. And I was thinking, if that was a yes vote, they all would have been there. Orla O'Connor would have been being lifted up on people's shoulders. Taoiseach would have been being glad-handed. You would have had Ivana Bacik standing at the front row with a huge grin on her. Bernie Linan would have been there with a pro-choice T-shirt. It would have been the usual kind of orgy we always see. And I thought the symbolism of the empty hall where they all went home in crushing defeat, and it was just 2 or 3 people representing the Citizen No campaign, which is what it was really. I thought that was pleasing. In a way that the other way would have been depressing for all the reasons you said.
And also there are people who listen to this podcast, and we've spoken before, who come to this podcast because they feel like they don't have their views or they don't hear alternate views on any mainstream media. And it just felt like this referendum result was, a real nod to those type of people, that there is a lot of people out there who quietly don't agree with what the government talk about, say, do. And when they go to the ballot box, they'll show it. And that's really, really comforting. You're not alone. You know what I mean? If you're not buying what the NGOs and the government are selling you on all this, woke progress, so-called progress, if you're not buying it, you're not alone. You're not alone by any sense. There is a silent majority, clearly.
I'll leave you, because we'll wrap it up now, but I'll leave you with a conversation I had last night in my Twitter DMs with a woman who lives in Cork. If she listens, she knows who she is. I won't go any further than that because I don't want to reveal the DMs of an identifiable person. But she basically said, "Look, what a day! It's phenomenal." The significance is that this woman is somebody who voted yes on gay marriage. She voted yes on repeal the 8th. I was joking the other day that she's kind of like the bellwether voter. As she goes, so goes the country. And I was just saying, look, I think a lot of people really needed that morale boost. People who thought they were alone, who suddenly found out that they're not. And I'll read what she said. She said, "You've no idea. I spoke to no one off Twitter bar my husband and work colleagues. And all of a sudden, my in-laws, my friends approached me the night before to say they were all voting no. I love that we were all afraid to say it aloud, but felt the same. A quiet campaign of common sense." And I think there's a lot of that about people who were nervous about the result because there's still a degree to which there's a little bit of fear about saying what you think. And hopefully this result has gone, if it does anything at all, hopefully it further lifts that sense of fear about saying what you think.
Yeah, and maybe people will realise that they have more power than they think and will march forward towards things like hate speech bill and, local and European elections and keep this going and call people to account.
Indeed. Anyway, we'll be there to cover it all as it happens. We'll be back on Friday with another weekly episode. This has been a special episode because you asked for it, and these are our thoughts. So, Sarah, thanks a million for taking time off your Sunday morning for joining with me. And I understand there might be a bit of a hangover after your celebrations last night, but no one would have noticed.
No.
All right. Listen, folks, thanks a million for listening. We'll be back on Friday. Until then, that was the weekend that really was. Talk to you soon.